Welcome to Fish and Rice Stories from Japan, a podcast where we dive deep into all things related to life here in Japan. I'm Tobi.
I'm Andri.
And today we want to talk about the transportation system in Japan, which is one of the first things you will encounter when you arrive here, whether it's as a tourist or you're moving here. And there's so many things to talk about, right?
Yes, my first experience coming to Japan was not too good when I started using transportation system. It appeared to me a little bit complicated. What do you think about Japanese public transportation system?
If I have to talk about, or if I have to try to define or use a couple of words, I would say it's reliable, right? When I'm here and I want to go catch a train, catch a bus, whatever it is, most of the time it's going to be on time and you're going to have a very smooth experience from the moment you board whatever train or bus you're going on and the moment you arrive. I grew up in France and we have a lot of strikes, we have a lot of delays with trains, and every time you go to the station or have to catch a bus, there's always a part of you that worries and thinks like, oh my God, is this train actually gonna be going? Should I go earlier? Should I call the company to double check 10 times? In Japan, if you go to the station, there will be a train at the time it's indicated. Of course, they have delays. I think the fact that they're always on time is a myth, and we can talk about it later. But overall, they're very reliable, and it's one of the best systems I've used. Why was it not like that for you? When you came here, you said you had difficulties, challenges. What kind of things do you face?
Oh yeah, reliability is not the challenge. I think the Japanese transportation system is very much reliable, as you say, with rare exceptions. I lived in China before. I am from Ukraine. And in both of those countries, public transportation is not the best, to say the least. So here it's very reliable, a little bit expensive compared to those countries.
You're paying for the service.
Yeah, exactly. Right, you get what you pay for. My problem was with the system, how they operate, and the biggest problem was with the language, because some of the smaller companies that operate some of the trains, because in Japan it's not only one company, it's several, they don't have much information in English, they don't have interactive maps or anything like that on the train. It's usually very analog or older versions, and sometimes it's just kanji, maybe a little bit of romaji, which is Latin letters, but it was still very difficult for me. How about you?
I didn't have this kind of challenge. I feel like, especially if you remain in central areas, in larger cities, everything is written out in like Latin letters. So even though you cannot read kanji, you can still read the station name, you can read where you're going. Sometimes the stations can be a little bit confusing, but I feel like with the Olympics being held in Tokyo not too long ago, well, it's already a year and a half, I think. But the government and the cities really put on a lot of effort into making the whole system much more easy to navigate, especially as a foreigner. We are here in Osaka, and the World Expo is coming here in 2025. So the Osaka government is also kind of trying to put on more signs and so on. For example, one thing I noticed here in Osaka, in subway stations, you will notice that when they indicate the exits, they will also have a tendency to say, oh, if you take this exit, you'll be next to Osaka Castle. You'll be next to whatever landmark a tourist might want to go visit. Right?
In English?
In English, yes.
Okay.
So that makes it quite easy with photos as well, so you can just see, oh, the castle is this exit, I'll just go that way. And I think they do put a lot of effort, but if you're in the countryside, it gets more tricky, right? Especially if you take the bus.
Buses was the biggest problem for me, and also trains. I moved first time when I came to Japan, I moved to Kobe, and I lived in Kobe for some time while trying to find Arima Onsen, the famous hot springs town here in Kansai. It was quite a challenge for me to go there by train. You have to transfer several times. There are no electronic screens to show how to get there, so I had to ask with very poor Japanese at that time and Google Translate how to get there. And in Kyoto, going to outskirts of Kyoto by bus was quite a challenge too. Finding a bus stop was the first biggest challenge. Yeah, but otherwise, even buses, which is much less reliable kind of transportation in Ukraine than trains, they are very reliable here and run on time.
Even in the countryside, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. So that was even kind of surprising for me. Yeah, let's move away a little bit from public transportation. And I don't have much experience using other types of transportation in Japan. I know that you are biking. You have a bicycle.
Yes,
how is
correct.
that working for you?
So cycling in Japan is very fun, but also quite tricky, I would say, if you cycle in the city, right? Because in, let's say, European countries, they have developed a lot of cycling lanes, and they really are trying to put an infrastructure for people to cycle around, make it a more easier community if you live downtown, and uncrowd the roads from the cars and so on. In Japan, because there's such a reliance on things like the trains, the subway, which are very efficient, very on time, are able to handle rush hour, they haven't really put as much effort, I think, on setting up an infrastructure for cyclists. So the way it works is basically there are no cycle lanes. And in some areas you'll see the sidewalk has been enlarged a tiny bit, and they will have a kind of red mark for bicycles. Or on larger avenues you'll see on the road, on the side there'll be like a blue dotted lane, which is supposed to be used by bicycles. However, in Japan, I'm not sure how it's called in English, but you're basically allowed to park in a double lane, so on the side of the road, wherever you want. In France, for example, it's much more strict. If you're going down a street, you cannot just park on the side of the street because you're going to block traffic. In Japan, they are allowed. And actually, there's a story. 2 years ago, I was on my way to work here by a bicycle, and I nearly had an accident because of someone being parked on the cycle lane, which was on the side of the road, and I had stopped a police officer who was not far, and I asked him, is he allowed to park there? And the police officer admitted that it's actually a very dangerous situation, but technically legal. They're not allowed to park there for a long time, but long enough to basically be on the side of the road and to be cutting my cycle lane. So you gotta get used to a little bit how it works here, understand how taxi drivers drive, and how they understand traffic, because it's very different. So cycling through the city, extremely convenient. It's fun, you enjoy the fresh air, you enjoy the good weather, because in Osaka most of the year we have good weather. You can see the change of seasons. It's very convenient to get around, but it can be quite dangerous. And I actually measured, if you are from your starting point downtown, if you're going in a kind of 8-kilometer diameter circle from your starting point, you will be as fast by bicycle as with the train or with the car.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow. That's great for people who are planning to come to Japan. And
yeah, I really recommend the bicycles. Just be careful when you get on the road, and try to find information online about where you're supposed to cycle. A lot of cyclists cycle on the sidewalk, which is technically allowed, but also risky for people just walking there. If you cycle on the road, you're more at risk because you might hit a car, not a person. So just be aware of your surroundings and kind of...
Do you cycle on the roads or on sidewalks?
I always cycle on the roads. There will be a few exceptions if, for example, it's late at night on an avenue and there's nobody on the sidewalk. I might take the sidewalk, but usually I avoid the sidewalk because people are unpredictable. Cars are usually supposed to stay in the lane or indicate if they make a turn, whereas people walking and looking at their smartphones will not really pay attention to what's around.
I see. Again, when I lived in China, in Peking, I used to own electric bike, and Peking, I would say, is relatively cyclist or also electric bike owner friendly city. There are lanes, a lot of them, and it's, I would say, much easier than here. So far, I've lived mostly in Kobe, and Kobe is a hilly area. There are many hills, and it's a little bit difficult to cycle up the hill, or if you know what I'm talking about, Osaka is very flat, easy to cycle around.
It is.
So I decided not to buy a bicycle or bike, any kind of. I was thinking about buying motorcycle, but for some reason gave up. Many people in Kobe own cars. I don't own a car. I don't drive. Do you drive?
I do, yes, and I did manage to get my Japanese driving license about a year ago, February last year, I think it was.
Okay.
Driving in Japan, like a friend of mine phrased it, opens a whole new world to you.
Okay.
Yeah, because, so if we circle back a little bit to, we were talking about the public transportation system, we mentioned it's very efficient and reliable. And this is very true, and especially if you go down, if you live in the cities, you can use a subway. Some cities like Hiroshima have a tramway. You have train systems that are connecting a lot of the very major metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. If you go out of those areas, it gets very difficult very quickly to go to specific areas, especially if you just want to do some tourist sightseeing and see areas that are maybe off the beaten path, off the central touristic destinations. And then having a car really changes everything, because you can just go everywhere you want, anytime you want. And so the public transportation system in Japan, although being reliable, you're also constraining yourself to the operating times, right? And trains and subways stop running at 11:30 midnight, even in the major cities, even on the weekends. And buses stop even earlier, and especially if you go to the countryside, you will have buses, but you'll have 1 or 2 buses per day. It's not very regular, so if you want to go there by bus, it's going to be a very tiresome journey. I remember with my girlfriend, we went to an onsen, you mentioned onsens before, in Nara Prefecture, beautiful area. But to go there from Osaka, we had to take a train, change the train, hop on a bus, and then it was still an hour bus. And then to leave from there, the last bus was at like 5 p.m. So we had to be sure that we finished our hike, finished staying in the onsen to catch this bus, otherwise you're stuck there. If you have a car, you can just go there at your own pace. You don't have the pressure of, oh, I need to catch the last thing. So having a car really opens a whole new world, and you are free to go to many areas, and it's really, really convenient if you don't want to depend on the public transportation system.
I see. I had such a situation when I took public transportation to some places like Awaji Island, and I was able to visit only one area because of that, because it took me almost 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to go back. I had to plan for the last bus.
And once you're there, you cannot really move around, right?
Yeah.
You go to where the station is, you can visit the areas around the station, but you cannot go just over the hill, because if you were to walk there, it will take an hour extra just to walk there, and in summer it's too hot, in winter it's too cold. And
exactly, so that was kind of the reason. And another situation was here in Osaka, or in Osaka area, when I went to Katsuoji.
Okay, yes.
Definitely recommend the place, but you have to plan the buses. There are only 4 or 5 buses a day going there and back. And I think it's around 5 that the last one runs, so you have to make sure. So,
Katsuoji, yes, the bus is very nice, but you can also, if you're able to walk, and you can easily access it by walking. There's 2 ways to go there. Straight right in front of Katsuoji, there's like a staircase going deep into the woods. If you follow this, you arrive down in Mino, and from there you'll have city buses that can bring you back to the station. Or if you follow along the road that goes through the mountains, you can get to the Mino waterfall, and if you follow the trail from the Mino waterfall, you can get to Mino station. That's about a 2-hour walk. It's a walk, right? So You could make it a hiking day, but yes, having the bus, if you are relying on the bus to get there, it's tricky. You need to...
Yeah, by car, I would see myself renting a car or owning a car and going there at my own pace and returning back. Yeah, so actually I hiked there and wanted to go back by bus. So that was my kind of, not a problem, but the journey.
So far, the Japanese transportation system, like, it's very reliable, but it quickly has limitations in a way.
Yeah.
If you go outside of the cities. If you're in the city, you can combine everything, which gets quite expensive, as you mentioned earlier. I don't know if you wanted to talk about the cost of the transportation system now, but it does add up quite quickly.
What do you think about costs of public transportation in Japan?
So the way the system works here is you pay by the distance, right? So the longer you stay on the train, the more stations you pass. They actually measure it in kilometers, so the amount of kilometers from your starting point. So it's not in terms of stations. The more you'll pay. And depending on the company you travel with, it gets expensive. And another situation is you are going from point A to point B, but you have to use two different train companies. You mentioned before there's a lot of train companies. The main one is JR, but you also have Kintetsu, you have Hanshin, you have Hankyu, and there's many more depending on where you are in Japan. Then if you have to take the first train with JR and then with Hanshin, you basically need to pay for two separate tickets. You pay for two tickets on one way, you pay for two tickets on the other way, and suddenly it adds up, and your daily trip, your cost for your trip during the day, they add up to $10, $20 quite quickly. And buses in the countryside are even more expensive. You've taken them, and you've seen the system with the board they have next to the driver. So if you're on a regular city bus or countryside bus, they're the same models. You hop onto the bus, you take your ticket, and on that ticket you'll have the number, right, from the number of the station you got onto the bus. And then next to the driver you'll have a signboard that basically says, if you have the ticket with this number, you pay this amount of money. And for every station the bus passes, that amount grows and grows and grows. And usually you can easily count that if you go from the start of the line to the end of the bus line, it's about $10. You'd say like over 1,000 yen easily for one way. So if you countryside day trip, one way with the bus, two ways with the bus, you're at over 2,000 yen plus the train to get to the bus station. It's like a easy $30 two-way. Now I don't know, depending to other countries, it might be cheap. Some other countries might be more expensive than this. Especially I can think of big cities, London, Paris, New York. But I have also experienced other systems that are more efficient or easier to use. I remember the city where I grew up, Toulouse. You pay for a monthly ticket and you can use unlimited public transportation. Or I know that Seoul has a system where you pay a fixed amount for every trip, regardless of how long you ride the train or the bus or whatever. I think Shanghai has a similar system as well, so there are alternatives, but...
Yes, living in Peking, it was relatively cheap. The subway system was fixed rate. It doesn't matter how many trips or how far you go, or one trip costs one amount of money. It was at that time around 50 euro cent, I would say, about that, and you can go as far as subway takes you, or just one stop would cost the same.
I think this is a great system. It makes it more accessible for everyone. If you travel far, it gets very expensive. One parenthesis would be that usually for your daily commute to work, in most cases a company would cover your daily commute fees within a certain distance here in Japan. So we're talking about private trips here. And
I find it amazing that companies cover your commutation fees coming from home to work. The same works for the company that we are working for.
I haven't heard of this in other places. For sure it exists, but I know in France it's not very common to have companies cover your fuel for the car or whatever fee you have.
Yeah, same in Ukraine, same in China that I know of. Usually transportation costs are not covered. Here in Japan, I've been working for 2 different companies now, and both of them were covering my transportation fees, which is really nice because I can use the same ticket that works on weekend too. And if I commute somewhere in between those stations, if I'm traveling or visiting my friends who live anywhere between, or even other trips, it makes it cheaper because that part of the trip is already paid and you pay only for the rest of the trip to another place. So I think it's very, very convenient. Many people, or at least that I know, they kind of complain about expensive or owning a car is an expensive thing here in Japan. What do you think about that? Is it expensive to own a car?
So I don't own a car personally. I know a few people that own a car. I've been thinking about purchasing a car, so I did look into this a little bit. And I think it really depends on the use you have for the car as compared to whether you'd use public transportation and if you have a need for the car, right? If you live in a city and you have a car, most likely you'll have to factor in the car, the insurance, the fuel, parking space, which can add up. But if we break it down a little bit, first I think it's important to know in Japan you have two types of cars, right? You have the regular cars that we know from all over the world, and then you have a type of car called K cars. K is KEI, and they are basically a special grade of cars that have to be below a certain weight with a specific type of engine, specific size. Usually you'll see all these kind of smaller cube-shaped cars. Most of them are in the K categories, and you can recognize them by their yellow
number plates.
Thank you. So those K cars have a lot of advantages. The cars themselves are much cheaper. They have lower taxes. They consume a little bit less fuel. And very interestingly, for example, riding on the highway in Japan is very expensive. And you have a lot of toll gates because every toll gate section is operated kind of by the city as far as I understand it. So if you cross a specific city section, the toll will go to that city. So if you pass many cities, you'll pay a lot of toll. And these K cars have a lower toll fee. The amount of toll you pay depends on the size of your car. Okay. So having a K car can be a big advantage. Now, there are safety concerns with K cars. They're smaller, have less protections around. But so this is an alternative for a very affordable kind of car in Japan. For the rest, the expenses, I think it really depends. Like, do you need a car? Do you want a car? Does it add value to your life? Because having the car will allow you to go to places you haven't been before, because it doesn't cut too deep into your budget, because many reasons like that. Then I think it makes sense to have a car. In some other cases, it might be better to just rent a car when you need it. Right? There's a lot of rental services, especially in the major cities. You can easily get a car for the day. The cheapest ones usually you can rent for about 5,000 yen a day, which is $40-ish right now with the current exchange rate. You can rent them for the day. Usually you can pick them up from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 in the evening, depending on where you take them from. And of course, toll and fuel are added to this. You have to take at your own cost. But you can usually rent a car for the day, all costs included, for about 10,000 yen, about $90, which I think is quite reasonable, and it gives you access to a lot of things.
I hear some of my friends complain about owning a car is very expensive, and if they don't use it to commute to their work, or they don't use it on a daily basis, just weekends, it turns out to be kind of a waste of money. If you want to do a weekend out and just drive, probably renting is much cheaper, or even taking a taxi.
I think that can be true. For the car cost, one thing we did mention, you have to do every 2 years you have to run your car through the test. I forgot the name right now in Japanese, but they will basically test your car for, is it still safe and under matching like all the regulations and okay to go on the road. You need to pay for this. Depending on the car, it adds up. It can be from $1,000, $2,000 or more if you have a very big car. So the cost of having the car is high, but we mentioned renting a car as an alternative. You are still limited to renting the car between the rental times, right? So if you don't bring back the car before that, you have to pay for the extra day. And sometimes that brings back the same pressure of, oh my God, we have to catch the last bus, otherwise we can't make home. And funnily enough, last year we went again to this onsen I mentioned before, where we went first by train. The year after we went by car. And we had the same issue where we wanted to enjoy ourselves a bit more, spend more time in the onsen. But we were like, oh, we have to start driving now, otherwise we won't make it back on time to hand back the car before they close the office, right? I think, yeah, it's all up to you, right? You have to calculate the cost benefits for yourself.
I see.
It's not cheap, but if it adds value to you and it makes sense for you to buy a car, I think it's more accessible than other places once you have the license.
Okay, makes sense. I don't, so I'm not thinking about that yet. Let's switch a little bit to long distance travel. I actually haven't traveled long distance in Japan that much. I've been to Hiroshima, which is quite far from here, from Osaka. You would have to take either Shinkansen or maybe drive there by car.
Or the bus. Long distance buses, highway buses. There are a lot. They are very convenient. And they're a good alternative depending on where you want to go.
And cheap, or relatively cheap.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, long distance travel. When you travel, or when you traveled, where did you go and how did you go there?
I've been to Hiroshima as well, over 2 years ago from Osaka. And that time I took an overnight bus. There are a lot of overnight buses connecting major cities in Japan. Usually if the travel time is over 6 hours, they'll have a night bus, something like that. They're quite comfortable. You can even pay for premium seats where you have just a seat for yourself. You can have like a sort of hood that closes down so you have like privacy.
Wow.
And nice service, leaves on time, arrives on time by the minute, at least in my experience. And
is it cheaper than Shinkansen?
Yes. So Shinkansen is the high-speed train here in Japan, and it's much cheaper. I just took the Shinkansen. I've only taken it 2 or 3 times, and most recently was 2 weeks ago, to go to Hakone near Tokyo from Osaka. One way was about 13,000 yen, so about $100 a little for one way. So $200 for 2 ways. And we were looking at the bus as well. It was about half the price. But the timing and the drop-off locations were not convenient, so we opted for the Shinkansen. Shinkansen, then other alternative. Honestly, it's very nice. It's really comfortable. You have a lot of seating space. It's really
fast, right?
You get to enjoy the landscape. And I was just reading an article today over lunch, and I fully agree with it. Is the best way to experience Japanese countryside is by train. You really get to see so many beautiful things. They have special sightseeing trains as well that go from just one to another station, just to witness the landscapes. You have special trains, also, for example, during Sakura season, to witness all the cherry blossoms that will go along a special route, just to see as many cherry blossoms as possible. You have trains that go between 2 stations through some beautiful mountain scenery where you can eat lunch and like things like that. And they also have like a famous luxury train that goes from the Kyushu island all the way, I think, to Osaka. And it's a sleeper train. You can spend 2 nights on it. I think very, very pricey, a few $1,000s, but from what I've seen, it's like
few $1,000.
Really, yes.
Oh my God.
It includes the nights, it includes the food as well, but it's like staying at a luxury hotel, right?
Okay.
So they have trains are wonderful in Japan, also for long distance. Just if you want to sit there and watch through out the windows and just experience the countryside, see the changing scenery. And the Shinkansen is one of them, much faster, very efficient, convenient to go in between big cities and connect. It's a good alternative as well to flying the plane, and more eco-friendly for sure. So,
to Hiroshima, I took the train Shinkansen from Kobe station. It was pretty fast.
About like 2 hours or less?
Even less. I think it was an hour and a half. It was one stop in Okayama, if I'm not mistaken, and then next stop was Hiroshima. It was about an hour and a half, really fast. And as you said, night bus was, what, like 6 hours? So if you want to be time efficient, definitely Shinkansen is better. How about airplanes? Have you tried flying in Japan?
I've only ever done domestic flights for like international connecting flights through Tokyo to get to Osaka, and once last year I took a domestic flight to go to Kyushu with a low-cost airline called Peach. Flight tickets are very affordable from these low-cost airlines. Of course, it's like everywhere, like Ryanair or in Europe or EasyJet or these kind of airlines. You have to pay extra for every little thing that you want, but it was convenient. Sometimes if the distance is too long, you don't want to take the Shinkansen because you might have to change trains and it might make it complicated. Of course, it has a bigger environmental impact to take the plane, so you can think about it, especially now they've managed to connect basically all the major islands by Shinkansen except for Shikoku. But they have a lot of domestic flights, Too many, perhaps, going in between closer cities. I know some other countries are taking measures for this. For example, France is setting up something where if the duration by train is about 2 hours, you are not allowed to have a flight between those two cities anymore. So they're trying to force people to use trains more, which I think is a good thing. And in Japan, it's not yet the case, and you have a lot of domestic flights. You can probably go from anywhere to anywhere. Easily by plane.
I would go, or I want to go to Hokkaido or Kyushu by plane because it's a very long journey by Shinkansen, and taking airplane would be also relatively cheap. I hear it's under $100. Under
Peach Airline I paid about that to go from Osaka to Fukuoka, about $100 one way, I think it was. So quite affordable. To Fukuoka, you can actually easily go by Shinkansen as well. I think it's like 3-4 hours. So
more expensive though?
Probably more expensive, but time-wise, I don't know. It might actually be even the same because with the airplane, you have to factor in. You have to go to the airport. You have to be there earlier. You have to check in. The train, you just get there, you hop on, and you hop off the next station. You're right downtown. So it really depends. For Hokkaido though, Hokkaido is quite far from Osaka. So I think the plane might be a better choice. Although you now have a Shinkansen line going as well.
Yeah, it's still a little bit far. You have to go to Tokyo and then from Tokyo,
go through Sendai all the way up through Aomori.
Probably much longer and much more expensive.
You probably have one of a very beautiful scenery. Reminds me of a long train journey I did in China, but that's maybe for another discussion.
Okay, train journey in China to Tibet?
Yes.
That was a really nice discussion today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I feel like we even just barely scratched the surface. Maybe we can get back to the topic later.
Expand.
Yes. In this series where we talk about adapting to daily life a little bit. And that's it for today, I guess. Thank you for watching Fish and Rice. This was our episode about the Japanese public transportation system and a little bit more. If you've liked it, hit the like button, subscribe, and ask all your questions in the comments. We'd love to answer all of them, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.
Bye.